The sound of crystal glasses clinking together sounded elegant, but to me, it was the distorted soundtrack to my approaching death. The pain didn't hit me hot like fire. It was cold, like a block of ice crushing my chest from the inside, squeezing a heart that was already skipping beats. Every sound around me blurred, except for the sharp, rhythmic clicking of Sarah's stiletto heels on the polished oak floor. I collapsed, my fingers clawing into the edge of the Persian rug, trying to gasp for air that was rapidly running out. But instead of helping me up, my sister just took a sip of her wine, looking down at me with pure disgust, as if I were a stain ruining the perfection of the ceremony. "Get up, Elena. Are you seriously acting this hard just to delay the reading of the will?" Her voice was sharp, cutting through the stifling air. I tried to wheeze out a plea for an ambulance, my hand shaking as I reached for the phone on the coffee table. But Sarah was faster. She snatched it, threw it hard onto the sofa on the other side of the room, and crossed her arms. In the lavish living room of the Blackwood estate, 12 people stood watching me struggle in absolute silence. They didn't see a sister or a niece dying. They just saw a nuisance blocking their path to Dad's massive fortune. As darkness began to curtain my vision on that cold living room floor, my mind drifted. Not to heaven, nor to hell. It drifted back to a bedroom smelling of strong antiseptic and wilted lilies on the second floor of this house, where I had spent the last 6 months fighting for every one of my father's breaths. People talk about sacrifice as something noble and glittering, but I know the truth. Sacrifice smells like adult diapers, cold porridge at 3 a.m., and exhaustion that eats away at your marrow. I'm Elena, 36, an accountant with a rising career. But I gave it all up, taking 6 months of unpaid leave to become a nurse, a maid, and a sentinel for my father, Thomas Blackwood. During those 6 months, my world shrank to the distance between a worn-out armchair and Dad's hospital bed. I knew the rhythm of the heart monitor better than my own breathing. I was the one wiping the cold sweat from his forehead when the tumor tortured him. I was the one changing the sheets 3 times a day when his body could no longer obey his mind. My father, once the sturdy pillar of the Blackwood business empire, had shrunk, frail, and exposed. But in my eyes, he had never been greater, because he was fighting the Reaper every second just to see me a little longer. And then, there was Sarah. If my sacrifice was a gritty, black-and-white documentary, Sarah's presence was a flashy, vibrant, yet soulless commercial interrupting the program. My sister didn't come to care. She came to perform. Once a week, and only when Mom was home, Sarah would appear. The roar of her Porsche sports car in the driveway was a loud announcement. "Look, the dutiful daughter has arrived." She walked into the sick room not with warm water or medicine, but with expensive imported flowers, which Dad was severely allergic to, and an outfit perfectly color-coordinated for the camera. I remember a Tuesday afternoon clearly. Sarah walked in, the smell of her heavy Chanel perfume overpowering the medicine, making Dad grimace. "Oh, Daddy, you look so fresh today." Her voice was high-pitched, so fake it gave me goosebumps. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding Dad's thin hand covered in IV lines. But she wasn't looking at his eyes. Her eyes were glued to her phone screen, adjusting the angle so the lighting highlighted her cheekbones and the tear rolling down her cheek exactly as scripted. Click, click, click. 3 photos, a touching caption about endless love for my warrior father. Then Sarah stood up, dusting off her hands as if she had touched something dirty. "I have to run, Elena. Important nail appointment at 4. You handle the rest. It's not like you have anything better to do." She glided out like a toxic breeze, leaving me with the silence and Dad's pained eyes. Total time she spent there: 18 minutes. The most painful part wasn't Sarah's heartlessness. I was used to that since we were kids. What tore me apart was Mom's reaction. She stood at the door, watching Sarah leave with adoring eyes, then turned to me, who hadn't slept in 3 days, hair messy, eyes dark with circles, and dropped a casual remark. "See your sister? Busy with a million things, but still makes time to visit Dad. You should learn from her devotion, Elena. Don't walk around with that gloomy face all day, it makes your father sadder." I didn't argue. I never argued. For 36 years, I lived under the shadow of a truth Mom had woven. Sarah was the miracle, and I was just the default. Sarah was born 2 months premature, fighting for life in an incubator, and the fear of losing her made Mom spend the rest of her life compensating with blind indulgence. She believed Sarah needed protection from every thorn, every responsibility. And me? I was born healthy, full term, so I automatically became the strong one who had to carry every piece of garbage Sarah dropped. But there was one thing Mom and Sarah never realized. In that dark room, when it was just father and daughter, Dad saw everything. That night, after Sarah left, Dad squeezed my hand. The grip was weak, but strangely determined. The tumor had stolen his booming voice, leaving only a raspy whisper. He pulled me close, his eyes, the only things in this house that still held clarity, looking straight into my soul. "I see everything." He forced every word through his teeth. "Don't let them break you." At the time, I thought he was just comforting me. I stroked his hair, whispered that everything would be fine, and went back to reading him the old Hemingway novel he loved. I had no idea that behind the resigned silence on that bed, the sharp mind of the Blackwood patriarch was silently calculating one final move. I didn't know that when I stepped out to buy medicine, Dad secretly called his private lawyer. I didn't know he hid a tiny voice recorder under his pillow every time Sarah walked in to perform. I thought I was fighting this hopeless war alone. I thought I was the invisible child, doing everything and receiving nothing but coldness. But I was wrong. Love isn't always loud like a car door slamming. Sometimes, love is a silent revenge plan, meticulously prepared by a dying father to protect the only daughter who truly loved him. And now, lying on the floor, breath faltering, I was just beginning to realize, maybe my death today isn't the end. Maybe it's the trigger for the bomb Dad planted, waiting for this exact moment to explode and burn down the entire facade of the Blackwood family. The human body is a brutally honest machine. It doesn't know how to lie like the numbers on the balance sheets I handle every day, and it certainly doesn't know how to fake it like my sister's smile. 2 weeks before that fateful day, my body started screaming. It began not with pain, but with a crushing silence, an invisible pressure, heavy like liquid lead, pouring into my chest every night. I am a senior CPA at one of the Big Four accounting firms in New York. Pressure, deadlines, and all-nighters fueled by black coffee were the fuel of my life. I was too used to ignoring signs of fatigue, considering them the price of professionalism. But this was different. Chest pain came and went like a ghost. Sometimes I'd be walking up the stairs to my Manhattan apartment, and my breath would just cut out. My lungs wheezed, trying to filter oxygen, but it felt like an invisible hand was strangling my windpipe. Cold sweat soaked my silk shirt, even though the building's heating was set to a perfect 72 degrees. I tried talking to Mom about this, a classic mistake that, at 36, I should have learned to avoid. It was a Saturday morning. I stopped by the Blackwood mansion to pick up some paperwork for Dad. Mom was in the tea room scrolling through her iPad to choose new curtains for summer. "Mom," I said, my hand unconsciously touching my left chest. "I haven't been feeling well lately. My chest hurts, and sometimes my left arm goes numb. I think I should see a cardiologist." Mom didn't look up. Her finger kept gliding over the screen, her voice steady and indifferent. "Here we go again, Elena. You're manifesting symptoms. You work too much. You eat poorly. It's just acid reflux or stress. Don't make a scene to seek attention. You know your father hates weakness." Seek attention. That phrase felt like a slap. In the Blackwood family, only one person was allowed to be weak: Sarah. As for me, I was the pack horse, and pack horses aren't allowed to get sick. I swallowed the words I was about to say, along with the high-dose painkiller I'd secretly taken in the bathroom. But scarier than the physical pain was the strange shift in Sarah's attitude. 6 months prior, Sarah rarely called me unless she needed to borrow money urgently because she maxed out her cards, or needed me to handle messy tax papers she was too lazy to read. But in the final weeks before Dad died and right after the funeral, Sarah suddenly became unusually interested in my schedule. She started texting, not checking in, but probing questions wrapped in fake concern. "Hey, Elena, heard you're super busy with tax season? Must be exhausted, right? The will reading is next Friday. Are you sure you can make it? I heard the lawyer say it could take all day. If you're too busy, just authorize the lawyer. No one will blame you." Suggestive questions. "Don't come. You don't need to be there. Go away." The climax was 3 days before the reading. Sarah invited me to lunch at a fancy French restaurant on the Upper East Side. She arrived early, sat by the window, glowing in a designer cream dress, a complete contrast to my dull gray business suit and pale face. Sarah ordered a salad niçoise and just picked at a few leaves, her sharp eyes glued to me like a predator assessing wounded prey. "You look terrible, Elena," Sarah said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You look like you're about to collapse. Are you sure you want to come to the family meeting? I mean, Dad's gone, and the will is just a formality to split up some sentimental items. You need rest more than sitting there listening to old lawyers drone on." I put down my fork, looking straight into her eyes. There was a strange excitement hidden deep in Sarah's gaze, anticipation. She was afraid of something, or hoping for something. I didn't understand then. I just thought she wanted the spotlight as always. "I'll be there, Sarah," I replied, my voice hoarse but firm. It was Dad's wish. He wanted both of us there. The smile on Sarah's lips froze for a tenth of a second before she recovered her usual fake expression. "Suit yourself. I'm just worried about your health. Just don't drop dead right there and ruin the solemn atmosphere." That sentence, ironically, became a brutal prophecy. The morning of the reading, I woke up feeling wrong to my core, unnameable, inexplicable. It was like walking into a dark room and your intuition tells you someone is standing in the corner, even if you can't see them. My chest felt heavy, as if a boulder was sitting on it even while lying down. My hands shook as I buttoned my shirt. Looking in the mirror, I saw a stranger staring back. Pale lips, vacant eyes. A weak voice echoed in my head. "Don't go. Call an ambulance now. Something is wrong." But the habit of obedience built over 36 years won. I was programmed never to inconvenience others, never to be late, and always to show up when required. I drank a sip of cold water, tried to push down the nausea, and grabbed my car keys. I drove to my parents' mansion in a semi-conscious state, unaware that I was driving straight into a trap. I didn't know that in the leather briefcase of the waiting lawyer and in the calculations of the sister greeting me at the door, my fate was already sealed. And I certainly couldn't have guessed that in less than an hour, my body's warning would turn from painful whispers into a silent scream in a room full of cold-blooded people. As my old sedan rolled onto the gravel driveway of the Blackwood estate, I felt like I was entering an enemy fortress rather than coming home. The front yard was packed with luxury cars, Mercedes, BMWs, and of course, Sarah's bright red Porsche parked arrogantly right in front of the steps, blocking the main entrance like a statement of ownership. I walked inside. The air was thick with the smell of lilies and expensive beeswax candles, the signature scent of high society funerals, where grief is measured by the number of wreaths, not tears. The large living room, where my clumsy piano practice once echoed in childhood, was now completely rearranged. 12 velvet chairs were arranged in neat rows, facing a large mahogany table in the center, where the lawyer's empty chair waited. It wasn't a family meeting. It was a theater auditorium, and Sarah was the star on stage. She stood there by the fireplace, cruelly radiant in a tight black Vera Wang dress. Her makeup was flawless, her blonde hair curled intricately. Sarah was holding Aunt Patricia's hand, nodding to accept condolences with a rehearsed grace. "You've worked so hard, Sarah," Aunt Patricia sniffled, dabbing a handkerchief to her dry eyes. "This family is so lucky to have a devoted daughter like you stepping up to handle everything." Sarah bowed her head modestly, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's my duty, Auntie. Dad is gone. I have to take his place caring for Mom and this family." I stood frozen at the doorway. The pain in my chest spiked again. Stronger this time, like an invisible drill boring into my ribs. I tried to breathe deep, but the air in the room felt sucked out by Sarah's overwhelming presence. When I stepped in, the conversation abruptly died. 12 pairs of eyes shifted to me. No welcome, no shared hug, just cold scrutiny and judgmental frowns. "Oh, Elena," Sarah's voice rang out, breaking the silence. She didn't walk over to greet me. She just stood her ground, raising her voice enough for the whole room to hear. "I thought you couldn't make it. You're always so busy with your important bookkeeping job. But that's great. At least you spared a little time to stop by and hear what Dad left behind." The implication was loaded. "You only came for the money." I found an empty chair in the darkest corner of the room, far from the center of power Sarah was holding. As I walked past, I heard Uncle Robert whisper to his wife, "That girl looks wrecked. Heard during Thomas's last days in the hospital she barely showed up. It was all Sarah running around." "Shh," his wife replied, glancing sideways at me with disdain. "She was never close to her father. She's more like a stranger than a daughter." I gripped the armrest, my nails digging into the velvet fabric. I wanted to jump up. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to pull out my phone and throw the medical bills in Sarah's face, the handwritten medication notes at 2 a.m., the photos of me sleeping slumped next to Dad's bed while Sarah was checking in at a resort in Miami. But I did nothing. The Blackwood family's harsh upbringing had taught me one single lesson: keeping up appearances is more important than staying alive. I swallowed the bitter lump in my throat, resigning myself to sit silently like a sinner awaiting sentencing. Across the room, my mother sat on the main sofa, surrounded by relatives. She looked small and frail, relying entirely on Sarah. When Sarah walked over and placed a hand on Mom's shoulder, she looked up at her with adoring eyes. "You know," Mom spoke up, her voice shaky but proud, "if not for Sarah, I don't know if I would have survived this past month. She sacrificed everything, her job, her personal life, just to be by her father's side. Thomas left peacefully thanks to Sarah." My heart, already beating erratically from illness, felt like it was crushed into powder. My sacrifice wasn't just ignored. It had been blatantly stolen and awarded to the person who abandoned my father. The lie in this room was so perfect, I began to wonder if my own memory was betraying me. Just then, the grandfather clock in the hall chimed, signaling 10 a.m. The oak doors opened, and Mr. Harrison, Dad's longtime private lawyer, walked in. Mr. Harrison was a man in his 60s, stern and unreadable. He carried a worn leather briefcase, his face showing zero emotion. The whole room held its breath. Relatives sat up straighter, greed visible in their eyes, staring hungrily at the briefcase. Sarah smiled confidently, stepping up to lead Mr. Harrison to his seat, looking like a queen preparing to receive her crown at her own coronation. She suspected nothing. No one in this room suspected a thing. And the moment Mr. Harrison placed the thick file on the table, my chest pain exploded. It wasn't needles anymore. It turned into a massive boulder, weighing 1,000 pounds, slamming straight down on my chest, crushing the life that was barely flickering. I opened my mouth but couldn't breathe. The world around me started to tilt. The greedy faces of my relatives became distorted. Voices buzzed like they were echoing from the bottom of the deep sea. I knew my body had reached its final limit. This play was about to take a bloody turn that no one in Sarah's script had anticipated. The pain was no longer a warning. It had become a death sentence executed immediately. It felt like a giant, invisible hand had reached into my chest, grabbed my heart, and squeezed it until it stopped beating. My blood seemed to freeze, cold, running down my spine, while sweat poured off me, soaking my silk shirt against my skin. I tried to grab the table edge for balance, but my fingers had lost all sensation. They slipped off the polished wood. And then, the world collapsed. Thud. I crashed onto the hardwood floor. The impact was hard enough that I felt my cheekbone vibrate, but that pain was nothing compared to the storm destroying my chest. My vision narrowed into a dark tunnel, seeing only the blurry, expensive shoes of the relatives surrounding me. No one screamed. No one ran to help. Just a silence that was terrifying. I tried to inhale, but my lungs felt filled with concrete. A raspy, pathetic wheeze escaped my throat. I reached a trembling hand forward toward the woman who gave birth to me. "Mom, help. Me." My mother half rose from the sofa, her eyes wavering between panic and confusion. She took a step toward me, maternal instinct kicking in for a brief moment. But just as she was about to bend down, a voice as sharp as a razor cut through the air, freezing every movement in the room. "Don't touch her, Mom!" Sarah shouted. Not out of concern, but out of anger. She walked quickly past me, her black dress hem brushing my arm like a final insult. She stood between me and Mom, arms crossed, looking down at me with supreme contempt. "Stop it right now, Elena. This act is old," Sarah hissed through her teeth. "You can't handle me running this ceremony, can you? You have to make yourself the center of attention right when the lawyer opens the file. It's pathetic." I wanted to scream that my heart was breaking, that this wasn't acting, but no sound came out. My hand fumbled on the floor, trying to find the phone that had fallen out of my bag when I fell. It was my only lifeline, 911. I just needed to press 3 numbers. My fingers touched the cold glass of the iPhone. Hope flared, but the next second, a sharp stiletto heel stomped hard on my wrist. I gasped in pain. Sarah bent down, snatching the phone from my hand. "No, no calling anyone," she declared, turning to face the room defiantly. "If we call 911, the ambulance comes, sirens blaring, police enter, and the will reading gets postponed. That is exactly what she wants. She wants to ruin our family's big day." She threw my phone onto the far sofa. The thud sounded like a coffin lid closing. Then she turned to my mother, her tone shifting to soothing but commanding. "Mom, sit down. She's just having a fake panic attack. Let her lie there for 10 minutes. She'll snap out of it when she sees no one cares." Mom looked at me, her daughter turning purple, convulsing on the floor, then looked at Sarah, the perfect, authoritative daughter. The struggle in her eyes lasted only seconds. Finally, she stepped back, sat down, and looked away. You're right, Sarah," she whispered tremblingly. "We shouldn't let trivial things interrupt." That betrayal hurt more than the heart attack. I lay there, cheek pressed to the cold floor, watching the legs of my aunts and uncles, my own blood, shrink back, avoiding me as if I were a contagious disease. Mr. Harrison, the lawyer, stood up, about to say something, but Sarah glared at him, signaling silence. Darkness began to swallow me. My breath broke, exhausted. So this is it, I thought. I'm going to die here, at the feet of these monsters. But they forgot one thing. The Blackwood mansion has many windows and not everyone is blind. Through the hazy fog of my closing eyes, I saw the glass door leading to the back garden crack open. A figure stood there. Not a relative, not a guest. It was Mrs. Eleanor, the widowed neighbor who lived next door, my father's only chess partner in his final years. She stood there, hands shaking violently but clutching a phone to her ear. She had seen everything. She saw me fall. She saw Sarah steal the phone. She saw my mother turn her back. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw her mouth screaming into the phone with a fury I had never seen in that gentle woman. Send an ambulance. Now. Someone is dying and they are letting her die. The siren wailed from a distance. Faint at first, then louder, tearing apart the fake silence of the living room. Sarah's face went pale. She spun around toward the window and for the first time, I saw fear creeping through her thick mask of makeup. But it was too late. My consciousness slipped away. The last thing I felt wasn't pain, but a strange relief. Because I knew, whether I lived or died after today, Sarah's show was over. And the witness to her crime was standing right there, holding the sword of justice. Death wasn't the eternal darkness I imagined. It was an endless corridor, where ambulance sirens screamed, piercing my eardrums, mixed with the rumble of gurney wheels on hard tile. I woke up in fragments of consciousness. First was the smell. Strong medical alcohol replacing the scent of Chanel and beeswax. Then the light. Blinding white fluorescent bulbs on the ceiling streaking past my eyes like comets. And finally the pain. No longer a violent crushing, but a dull, throbbing ache, signaling I was still alive. When I opened my eyes fully, the world shrank to the 4 pale blue walls of the intensive care unit, ICU. The heart monitor beeped, beeped, steadily beside my ear like a reset countdown clock. Sitting by my bed wasn't Mom, nor Sarah. It was a man in dark blue scrubs studying a chart with a grave expression. Dr. Reeves. He had the eyes of someone who had seen too much of the fragile line between life and death, and those eyes held a carefully suppressed rage. Seeing me stir, he put the file down, leaning forward. "Welcome back, Ms. Blackwood." His voice was deep and warm, but carried the weight of steel. "I'm Dr. Reeves. You suffered an acute myocardial infarction caused by extreme, prolonged stress. You were clinically dead for 45 seconds in the ambulance." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. He handed me a cup of water with a straw, patiently waiting for me to take small sips. I'm alive," I whispered, the words sounding foreign. "Yes, you are, but it's a miracle," Dr. Reeves said, and his gaze hardened. "Ms. Blackwood, I need you to listen closely. Your heart condition is serious but manageable if treated early. But today, you arrived here too late. That delay caused permanent damage to your heart muscle." He paused, as if weighing whether to continue. Then he decided to be blunt. "The person who called 911, Mrs. Eleanor, provided the emergency team with vital information. She stated that your family prevented help from being called for at least 12 minutes from the moment you collapsed. In cardiology, those 12 minutes are the difference between full recovery and death." I closed my eyes, the image of Sarah stepping on my hand vivid in my mind. They thought I was acting," I whispered, hot tears spilling from the corners of my eyes. "That wasn't acting. That was medical distress," Dr. Reeves interrupted, his voice icy. "And I have documented everything, from Eleanor's witness statement to your vitals upon admission proving the duration of neglect. This file is now not just a medical record, it is legal evidence." What I didn't see personally, but was later told by a nurse with undisguised glee, was what happened outside in the waiting room. When the Blackwood family arrived at the hospital, not out of worry for me, but to save face, Sarah immediately switched to grieving sister mode. She sat with her head on Mom's shoulder, sobbing whenever a nurse walked by. But that act was ripped apart when Dr. Reeves walked out of the ER. Instead of calling the family into a private room, Dr. Reeves stood right in the middle of the crowded lobby, looking straight at Sarah sitting on the vinyl chair. "Are you Sarah Blackwood?" he asked, his voice echoing down the quiet hallway. Sarah stood up, smoothing her dress, her tear-stained face looking up hopefully. "Yes, I'm her sister. How is she, doctor? I was so worried." "Stop." Dr. Reeves held up a hand, blocking her stream of crocodile tears. "I don't need to hear it. I came out here just to inform you and your family of a medical fact." Everyone in the waiting room turned to look. The tension was like a wire about to snap. "Your sister didn't almost die because of a weak heart," Dr. Reeves said, every word hammering into the air. "She almost died because of your cruelty. I save lives every day, Ms. Blackwood, but I have never seen anyone try to kill their sibling with silence like you did in those 12 minutes." The blood drained from Sarah's face. She opened her mouth to argue, to talk about me overreacting. But the fiery glare of the old doctor incinerated every excuse. "If she doesn't make it through the night," he lowered his voice to a terrifying whisper, "I will be the first one to call the police and the district attorney. Now sit down and pray, not for your sister, but for yourself." Back in the hospital room, silence returned as the door opened again. This time it was Mrs. Eleanor. She entered softly like a gentle ghost, clutching her old handbag. She sat in the chair the doctor had vacated, taking my cold hand. "You did well, Elena," she whispered, smoothing the hair off my forehead. "You survived. Thank you. If not for you." "Don't thank me." She smiled mysteriously, her eyes twinkling with a strange sharpness. "Thank your father. He knew this day would come." I looked at her, confused. "Dad? But Dad is gone?" Eleanor leaned close to my ear, her voice becoming serious and secretive. "Thomas didn't just leave money, Elena. He left a trap. He saw how Sarah treated you. He heard the lies. And before he died, he gave me something to hold for you. He said, 'Only give this to Elena when she is backed into a corner.' And today, Sarah backed you there." Eleanor opened her bag, pulling out a thick yellow envelope sealed with wax bearing the Blackwood family crest. "Rest now, dear. Tomorrow, when the lawyer comes to read the real will, not the draft Sarah is dreaming of, you will need all your strength, because the real storm hasn't even started yet." I lay there, clutching the envelope, feeling its weight. Outside the window, dawn was breaking. For the first time in years, I no longer felt afraid of the darkness of this family, because I knew inside this envelope wasn't just paper, it was my father's sword, and I was ready to draw it. Attorney Harrison's office was on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, overlooking Central Park as the leaves turned amber. The room reeked of power, polished mahogany, premium leather, and expensive silence soundproofed against the city noise below. But today, the air didn't smell like money, it smelled like blood, metaphorically. The scent of predators waiting to tear apart the legacy of a fallen old lion. I sat at the far end of the long oval table. Next to me was an empty chair reserved for Mrs. Eleanor, invited as a special witness but not yet due to appear. Opposite me, at the head of the table, the spot that rightfully belonged to the patriarch, Sarah sat with legs crossed, confidently scrolling through her phone. Today she wore an ivory Dior suit, looking angelic and regal. But I knew it was the white of fake mourning. Mom sat next to her, fiddling with her pearls, her eyes avoiding mine whenever they accidentally met. "Can we start yet, Mr. Harrison?" Sarah spoke up, not bothering to look up from her screen. I have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin at 1 thou. I don't want to waste time on formalities when we all know the outcome. Mr. Harrison sat at the other end, calmly adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. He didn't rush to answer. He opened his worn leather briefcase, pulled out a thick file, and placed it on the table with a solid thud. That sound was like a judge's gavel striking to begin the trial. We will begin when I say we begin, Miss Blackwood, he said, his tone cold enough to make Sarah stop scrolling and frown in annoyance. The room went dead silent. The relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, leaned forward, greed visible in their eyes. They knew Sarah was the main heir, but they hoped to pick up some crumbs from the banquet, a vacation home in the Hamptons, or some stray stocks. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, opening the first page. Before we get into the asset distribution details, he said slowly, I need to announce a significant legal change. The will you are all thinking of, drafted 5 years ago, has been revoked. The air was sucked out of the room. Sarah laughed, a short, dismissive sound. Are you joking? My father didn't visit any law office in the last 6 months. He was bedridden, and I controlled all visitors. True, Thomas didn't come to my office, Mr. Harrison replied calmly, his sharp eyes locking onto Sarah. But I went to him. On the nights you were busy with parties, and while Ms. Elena here was watching over his bedside, on the 14th of last month, 1 month before he passed, Thomas Blackwood signed a new will, witnessed by 2 independent doctors confirming he was of sound mind. Sarah went rigid. The smile on her lips vanished. Mom started to tremble, her hands gripping the table edge. And here is the content, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice cutting like surgical precision. Regarding real estate, the mansion in Greenwich, the penthouse in Manhattan, and the estate in Martha's Vineyard, along with 85% of the shares in the Blackwood Group. He paused for a second. The room held its breath. Sarah smirked, preparing to stand up to accept her power. Are bequeathed entirely to my second daughter, Elena Blackwood. Time seemed to stop. I heard the wall clock ticking. I saw Sarah's face turn from rosy to pale white, then a harsh red. Her mouth gaped, but no words came out. Whoa, what? She stammered, voice cracking. You read the wrong name. You read it wrong. Mr. Harrison ignored her, continuing to read. Regarding my wife, Margaret Blackwood, I leave a monthly allowance at the minimum level required by state law, sufficient to maintain a basic standard of living, but excluding management rights over any assets. And regarding my eldest daughter, Sarah Blackwood. Mr. Harrison looked up, eyeing Sarah with a mix of pity and contempt. I leave her a cash sum of $5,000. This amount is equivalent to the total value of gifts she bought for me using my own credit card over the last 10 years. Other than this, she is to receive absolutely nothing from my estate. Bang! Sarah slammed her hand on the table, shooting up. Her expensive leather chair tipped over backward. You fraud! This is fraud! She screamed, her beautiful face twisted in rage. My father was crazy. He had Alzheimer's. He didn't know what he was signing. You. She pointed a finger straight at my face, shaking like it was about to snap. You manipulated him. You poisoned his mind with lies when I wasn't there. The relatives started whispering. Uncle Robert stood up, ready to side with Sarah to protest. I remained seated. I didn't scream, didn't gloat. I just looked at her. For the first time in my life, I looked at Sarah and didn't see a powerful older sister, but a spoiled child screaming because someone took a toy that wasn't hers. Mr. Harrison calmly closed the file, waiting for Sarah's screaming to die down slightly before continuing, his voice ice cold. You can sue, Ms. Blackwood, but I advise you to hear the rest of what's in this briefcase before calling your lawyer. Because Thomas didn't just leave a will, he also left a truth file. Truth file? Mom gasped, her voice breaking. Yes. Mr. Harrison placed his hand on another envelope, this one deep red. Thomas anticipated you would fight back, claim he was insane, and attack Miss Elena. So, he prepared evidence to ensure that if you dare step foot in court to contest this, you won't just leave empty-handed, you might leave in handcuffs. The room fell into a deathly silence again. Sarah stood frozen, breathing heavily. She stared at the red envelope like it was a ticking bomb. And she was right. It was the bomb that would blow away the last shred of her reputation. The red envelope lay on the dark mahogany table like an open wound, drawing every fearful gaze in the sealed room. The atmosphere was thick, heavy enough that the hum of the central AC sounded loud like a chainsaw in the distance. Sarah was still standing, chest heaving violently, eyes wild. She had just been stripped of her inheritance, but greed and delusion were still trying to cling to the weak argument that Dad had been manipulated. Mr. Harrison said nothing, slowly removing the wax seal. The tearing paper sounded dry and sharp, like a sentence being passed. 6 months ago, Mr. Harrison began, voice steady as a machine. Thomas received a call from the fraud department at Chase Bank. Someone had tried to withdraw $30,000 from his retirement savings account using a check. He pulled out the first paper, a photocopy of a check, clipped to a forensic report. The signature on the check looks very similar to Thomas's at a glance. However, the stroke at the end of the letters is shaky, and the pen pressure doesn't match. The bank blocked this transaction, and they sent Thomas a handwriting analysis. Mr. Harrison slid the paper across the table, stopping right in front of Sarah. The forensic analysis confirms 99.9% that the handwriting belongs to you, Sarah Blackwood. The room gasped in shock. Mom covered her mouth, eyes wide staring at her darling daughter. Sarah stared at the paper, face drained of blood. She stammered, trying to find an excuse. That's a misunderstanding. I needed money urgently for a deposit on a new apartment. Dad agreed to loan it but forgot to sign, so I just signed for him. I intended to pay it back. Thomas never agreed, Mr. Harrison interrupted coldly. When he found out, he was heartbroken. But instead of calling the police then, he chose silence. He wanted to see if you would ever confess and apologize. He waited 5 months on his deathbed. But you not only showed no remorse, you continued to drain your mother's petty cash. I sat still, watching Sarah crumble. Now I understood the sad looks Dad gave Sarah whenever she entered the room. He didn't just see a thoughtless child. He saw a thief waiting for him to die. But that is only financial fraud, Mr. Harrison continued, pulling a second document from the envelope. The next charge is much more serious. It could cost you not just money, but your freedom. This time, it was a notarized affidavit. This is the official testimony of Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the witness present at the scene the day Ms. Elena suffered her heart attack. Your actions and words that day were recorded in detail. Mr. Harrison began to read, emphasizing every word. The defendant, Sarah Blackwood, snatched the victim's phone. When the victim begged for help, the defendant ordered Margaret not to call 911. The defendant stated, "Ignore her, she's just acting." This delay lasted approximately 12 minutes until I, Eleanor Vance, called emergency services from my home. Mr. Harrison put the paper down, took off his glasses, and looked straight into Sarah's eyes now wide with absolute terror. Ms. Sarah, the law in this state is very clear. No one is obligated to rescue a stranger. But actively preventing someone from accessing emergency services, leading to severe bodily harm, falls under interference with emergency medical services. Combined with the fact that you were the de facto guardian at the time, we have grounds to charge you with negligent homicide, had Ms. Elena not survived. Lucky for you, your sister is alive, he continued, voice hardening. But this evidence, from forging signatures to abandoning a dying person, is more than enough to put you in prison for at least 3 to 5 years." Sarah stumbled back, bumping into the wall. The arrogance, the glamour of the high society lady had vanished completely. Now, standing before me was just a cowardly criminal trembling in fear. She turned to Mom, eyes pleading for help. "Mom, say something, he's lying. I didn't want to kill her. You know that." But my mother, the woman who lived her whole life in the shadow of blind indulgence, was now looking at Sarah like a stranger. She remembered the moment she tried to stand up to save me, and Sarah's icy voice ordering her to sit down. The truth was so naked she couldn't deny it anymore. She lowered her head, shoulders shaking, and remained silent. The silence this time wasn't to protect Sarah, it was rejection. Mr. Harrison turned to me, his eyes softening slightly. "Miss Elena, Thomas left very clear instructions. This entire truth file belongs to you. You have the right to decide. Submit it to the police and take your sister to court, or keep it as leverage to ensure the new will is executed without any dispute." I stood up. The sound of the chair sliding broke the stillness. I took the thick file in my hand. It was heavy. The weight of pain, of betrayal, and of the silent love Dad had for me. I walked slowly toward Sarah. She shrank back, pressing against the wall, tear-filled eyes looking at me in fear. Was she afraid I would hit her? No. She was more afraid of what I held in my hand than any physical blow. I leaned close to her ear, whispering in a cold voice, the voice of the new head of the Blackwood family. "You said I was pathetic lying on the floor, right, Sarah? Now look who's pathetic." I turned my back, glancing over the relatives sitting like statues, then said to Mr. Harrison, "I need time to think, Mr. Harrison. But for now, get all of them out of my office. Immediately." That was the moment the trap snapped shut. Sarah didn't just lose the assets. She was trapped in an invisible prison built by my father, and the only key was in the hands of the person she despised most. 3 days after that chaotic will reading, news of Sarah Blackwood's downfall spread like wildfire through New York's elite. In a world where reputation is more valuable than gold, a rumor of financial fraud and leaving a relative to die was enough to slam every door shut. I was sitting in my small apartment, sipping hot tea and watching the drizzle outside the window, when the doorbell rang. Rapidly, desperately. I opened the door. Standing before me wasn't the proud Instagram queen of the Blackwood line. It was a ghost. Sarah wore a crumpled trench coat over wrinkled pajamas. Her usually glossy blonde hair was matted and messy. Her eyes were puffy, bloodshot, and smeared mascara ran down her cheeks in ugly black streaks. The smell of cheap gin wafted from her breath when she opened her mouth. "Please, Elena." Her voice was broken, raspy like sandpaper on wood. "Let me in. I have nowhere else to go." I stepped back, saying nothing, just leaving the door open. Sarah stumbled in and immediately collapsed onto the floor of my living room. She didn't sit on the sofa. She kneeled right on the rug, face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "I lost everything," Sarah screamed through her fingers. "The insurance company fired me this morning. They said I violated the ethics clause. Friends blocked my number. Even my fiancé. He called off the engagement. He said he can't marry a fraud." I stood leaning against the wall, arms crossed, looking down at my sister. No gloating, no pity, just the coldness of a judge watching a criminal confess. "Those are consequences, Sarah," I said calmly. "I didn't do it. You brought it on yourself." Sarah lifted her head, crawling toward me, reaching a shaking hand to grab the hem of my pants. I stepped back, avoiding the touch like a pathogen. I know I was wrong," Sarah sobbed, face messy with tears and snot. "But I'm your sister. We have the same blood. Mom is completely broken at home. She won't eat. Can you bear to watch this family fall apart? Please, don't give that file to the police. If you do, I'll go to jail. I can't go to jail, Elena. I'll die in there. You're afraid of dying in jail? I asked, voice sharp as a knife. Did you think about how I felt dying on the cold floor, watching you stand there with crossed arms forbidding Mom to call 911? Did you remember we had the same blood then? Sarah choked. She lowered her head, shoulders shaking. I don't need your cheap apologies, I continued, walking to the small table where I had placed a document carefully drafted by Mr. Harrison. I don't intend to put you in jail, Sarah. Not because I love you, but because I don't want Dad's name tarnished by having a criminal daughter, but your freedom has a price. I threw the document down in front of Sarah. These are my conditions. Sign it, or I call 911 right now and report a criminal case. Sarah scrambled for the paper, reading hungrily. First, I read each clause aloud, voice echoing in the quiet room. You will attend a mandatory psychological therapy program for 12 months. Not a spa retreat, but real psychiatric therapy for narcissistic personality disorder. Second, you will write a detailed confession about forging the signature and blocking the emergency call. My lawyer will hold this confession. If you dare contact me or badmouth me to anyone, it goes straight to the police. And third, I leaned down, looking straight into her panicked eyes. You and Mom will move out of the Blackwood mansion within 1 week. That house is mine now. I'm selling it. I don't want a trace of you existing in Dad's space. Sarah looked up at me, expression shifting from pleading to horror. You're kicking Mom and me out onto the street? I'm giving you a small apartment in the suburbs and the minimum allowance per the will. That is my final mercy. Sign it. Sarah held the pen, hand shaking so bad she almost dropped it. But then, before signing, she burst into tears. This time, the crying sounded different. It wasn't acting anymore. It was the cry of a human being completely stripped bare, naked and ugly. Why? Sarah whispered. Voice choked. Why did Dad do this to me? I was always his beautiful daughter. I always made him laugh. Why did he choose you? I looked at her, and suddenly realized the source of all the sin. Because Dad saw the truth, Sarah. Sarah shook her head, tears streaming. And then, she uttered a confession she had probably buried for 36 years, a confession that made me shudder. I always hated you. Not because you were boring, Sarah said, voice cracking. I hated you because of how Dad looked at you. Dad looked at me like a fragile glass doll, needing pampering but useless. But Dad looked at you. He looked at you with respect. He trusted you. I had all the nice clothes, but you had Dad's gaze. I wanted to destroy you to prove you were just as useless as me. The room fell into absolute silence. That confession was the final puzzle piece. Sarah's cruelty wasn't born of greed, but of deep-seated jealousy of a child who never grew up, always feeling inferior to the invisible sister. She tried to kill me just to silence her own insecurity. Sign it, Sarah, I said gently but firmly. And after you walk out that door, we are no longer sisters. Sarah signed. The signature was scrawled, ugly, lacking any flair. She stood up, stumbling out, leaving the paper on the floor. When the door closed behind her, I didn't feel joy. I just felt a vast emptiness, but at the same time, a gentle release. The ghost of the Blackwood family had finally been exorcised. A week after the confrontation at my apartment, a moving truck parked in front of the Blackwood mansion. It was pouring rain, a gray, heavy rain typical of New York autumn, as if the sky was washing away the final remnants of a rotten dynasty. I stood by the second-floor window, Dad's old study, looking down at the yard. I saw Sarah. She was no longer the haughty queen in designer dresses. She wore old jeans, hair in a rushed bun, trudging silently carrying cardboard boxes to the truck. Mom walked behind, clutching her old Persian cat, her shoulders slumped under the weight of defeat. They didn't look up at me. No goodbye. No tearful reconciliation hug like in cheesy family movies. Just the sound of the truck engine starting and tires crunching on wet gravel as they rolled out the gate, heading toward the shabby suburban apartment I had arranged. When the truck disappeared behind the old oaks, absolute silence wrapped the house. But this time, the silence wasn't scary. It wasn't cold. It was the quiet of freedom. For the first time in 36 years, I took a deep breath, and the air entering my lungs felt so sweet. The ghosts were banished. My new life didn't start with lavish parties, but with quiet Sunday evenings beside Mrs. Eleanor. I didn't sell the house immediately as I threatened Sarah. I kept it, but completely changed the interior. I took down Sarah's smug portraits, replacing them with the landscapes Dad loved. Mrs. Eleanor became a regular guest, and then, my real family. We often sat by the fireplace, drinking tea and playing chess. She told me stories about Dad, the man who silently fought for me when I had no idea. I realized that family isn't defined by DNA or lineage. Family is a verb. Family is a choice. Mrs. Eleanor, a neighbor with no blood relation, chose to save my life when my birth mother chose to turn her back. That is family. 6 months later, I used a large portion of the inheritance to establish the Thomas Blackwood Heart Foundation. The goal wasn't just medical support. We focused on helping abandoned patients, elderly people with no children to care for them, women isolated and abused by their families. At the launch ceremony, I stood before a memorial plaque for Dad. The inscription on the polished brass read, "Dedicated to Thomas A. Blackwood, the man who saw the invisible and loved in silence." I touched the words, and for the first time, I cried. Not out of pain, but out of healing. My heart, the thing that was crushed on the cold floor that day, was now beating stronger than ever. It carried a large scar, but that scar reminded me that I survived. About a year later, I received a letter from Sarah. Cheap envelope, shaky handwriting. I didn't need to open it to guess the contents. Probably complaints about a hard life, about how she learned her lesson, and a subtle plea to return to the wealthy life of before. She might have changed, or maybe not. I held the letter, standing before the roaring fireplace. For a moment, I thought about tearing it open to read, but then I stopped. Why should I give her a chance to enter my mind again? Why should I care about the pain of someone who once wanted me dead? I dropped the letter into the fire. The paper caught quickly, curling up, turning black, then crumbling to ash. I watched it burn without feeling anything. No anger, no gloating, just absolute indifference. Indifference. That is the most brutal revenge against someone who craves attention like Sarah. My story ends here, but your story is still continuing. If you are listening to this and feel your chest tighten with empathy, I want to tell you one thing. Maybe you are also the invisible person in your own family. Maybe you are the one who always sacrifices, always tolerates, always has to be the sensible one, while siblings are allowed to be selfish. You wonder why you try until you're exhausted, but it's never enough. You wonder why your parents' love has conditions. Please listen closely. Your value does not lie in their recognition. Their blindness does not dim your light. Don't wait until you collapse on the floor with a heart attack to realize the truth. Don't wait until death is near to dare to live for yourself. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to say no. And most importantly, you have the right to walk away from toxic relationships, even if they share your blood. Forgiveness is a beautiful thing, but your safety and self-respect are more important. Sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to stop playing and leave the table. I am Elena Blackwood. I was once invisible, trampled, and almost died craving love from the wrong people. But today, I stand here, living my own life, surrounded by people who truly cherish me, and I believe you can do the same. Thank you for listening to my journey of justice. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Share your own story. We are not alone. We are a community of survivors, strong and resilient. Don't forget to subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Every week we will bring you stories of courage, karma, and the power of standing up for what belongs to you. See you in the next story. Remember, you deserve to be loved, and you never have to apologize for choosing yourself.